Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you've left for me in the comments section of my Critical Q&A videos or have sent to me by email at askchrisshelton@gmail.com. All right, I hope you guys like the new intro to the Q&A videos. That's going to be our new intro for these. I also did a new intro for my Thursday videos, which you'll see then. All part of, in fact, the final parts of my sort of new or updated or refurbished branding for my channel and for my website. That's also got a new theme and sort of look and feel to it. And I think the very last thing I need to do is do the same thing for my podcast website. But everything else graphically and all that's pretty even with everything else, and I'm pretty happy with it. So I hope you guys like it too. Also, this week, pretty informative and important video for Scientology watchers out there about updates from inside the world of Scientology that I don't think you're going to get elsewhere. So I hope you guys checked out that video. And also, this podcast this week was a talk with a attorney, actually, about the Scientology justice system, which we have commented on here many times, answered a lot of questions about it. And I thought we'd do a whole podcast kind of breaking the whole thing down and looking at, and even then, an hour talking about it, we still didn't get to every possible comment or critique or permutation of what we could have talked about with the whole system. But we certainly covered some very important areas on it, including some things I've never talked about before. So I hope you will check that podcast out too. And finally, the last thing I wanted to say is, the people who signed on with Patreon to help support my channel and help keep me doing what I'm doing here, I cannot give enough shout outs and thank yous to all of you for doing that. This studio space and the new apartment that we sort of moved into here in order to be able to have this is not yet, we haven't quite hit that target that I actually need to hit in order to make this a firm reality. So I hope that some of you out there who are enjoying my channel and enjoying the content here will consider signing up on Patreon to help support what I'm doing. Now let's go ahead and get on with your questions. Matt Lessner. What is the training that Scientologists take in order to be able to watch content like yours and not be swayed while investigating the suppressive person content? All right, so basically what you're asking is how is it that Scientologists and especially Sea Org members can watch my channel and not be affected by it as far as creating doubts and reservations and problems in their head about it? Well, for one thing, I can tell you that a lot of Scientologists who come to my channel do get fairly triggered. Some of them leave comments, even independent Scientologists who aren't part of the official church. And that's fine. They can leave critical comments as long as they're not, name-calling or being a jerk about it. I'm always willing to entertain alternate ideas and points of view about things I say. But as far as hardcore Scientologists, some of them have come to my channel and they have changed their minds about things, and they've contacted me afterwards saying, I watched your videos and really got me thinking about some things, and now I'm not so sure that this Scientology stuff is really what it should be. So in that regard, I have had some success, which was kind of the original point of doing this channel. It changed over the years. I'm not really trying to appeal to Scientologists directly now, like I was with my first videos, but it still happens. Now, as far as the training goes, there is a course that almost all Scientologists do called the PTS/SP course, or the Potential Trouble Source and Suppressive Person course. And it's how to confront and shatter suppression. And of course, Scientologists these days don't confront and shatter suppression, they run away from it. They just avoid it like the plague. They act like it doesn't exist. They don't engage with it. They don't want to have anything to do with it. Because the questions that us former members and critics ask are questions they cannot answer honestly and deal with the honest answers, so they have to run away from that. And we'll talk a little bit more in a second about some of the mechanisms behind that. But the training of this course is done in such a way that it teaches you that people who are anti-Scientology are also antisocial. They are suppressive persons. They're an antisocial personality. They are merchants of chaos. These are all terms Hubbard came up with over the years for people who were critical of his work. He didn't like that. Hubbard had a very vindictive nature. He wasn't a live and let live, turn the other cheek kind of guy. And he inculcates or educates Scientologists to also follow in his footsteps that way. And that's how you get Scientologists who are willing to go do fair game actions on people, treat people like crap if they, don't follow the party line anymore. As I've gone on at length, it's about the us versus them mentality. That's part of every destructive cult. Scientology does a really good job of it. This course teaches that the SPs are antisocial. It teaches that they are low-toned on the tone scale, on Scientology's scale of emotions, which I'm putting a video on together right now. That means that because they're low-toned, that means that they lie consistently. That's their way of, that's what Scientologists are told to think about people like me, or Leah, or Mike Rinder, or other, Tony Ortega, or any number of critics you want to name. We're all liars. We all have axes to grind. We're all people who have done morally reprehensible things. And because we've done those morally reprehensible things, according to L. Ron Hubbard, that is what causes us to be anti-Scientology in the first place. So it's really, we're only speaking out of our own guilty consciences that we criticize Scientology in any way. That is Hubbard's dogma, and that's what Scientologists learn to believe. That's what they're indoctrinated in. So when they have that filter in place, and that's just one of many. I mean, there's a lot of other information on this course about handling black propaganda and how people who spread black propaganda are, like gossip mongers, and they, and again, not to be trusted. These are people who do not have truth in mind. They do not have anybody's best interests in mind except their own. And they are, at their core, scared, frightened little people who tell all these lies in an effort to distract and get people away from Scientology, because, according to Hubbard, Scientology is the one and only true path to eternal spiritual freedom and salvation. So anybody who would be against that is clearly psychotic. Duh. So that's the attitude that Scientologists have and bring to any, when they are confronted with anti-Scientology information, or information that tries to clarify what Scientology is all about, because I'll characterize myself as anti-Scientology, but it's not really the point to be against. The point is to try to just talk about the truth, and the truth is Scientology's bad stuff. So their whole attitude about anybody, who does that is that they are lying, antisocial, criminal scumbags. So it's pretty easy, when you create that frame of mind in somebody's head, for them to just ignore or not give any credibility or credence to what you have to say. I mean, would you listen to what Charles Manson has to say about anything? Or Jeffrey Dahmer or Hitler? No, of course you wouldn't. You wouldn't. I mean, who would? Who would give a crap about what any of those people have to say about anything? Even if Charles Manson didn't like the weather that day, I'd probably be like, well, good. Like, I hope it rains on your head, you evil person, So that's the kind of attitude they come at this with. And the people at the Office of Special Affairs who are tasked with looking at N theta on the internet, i.e. stuff like mine, that's what Scientologists call N theta, bad news, lies, vicious nonsense. They are indoctrinated even further into this belief. They're further indoctrinated into Hubbard's conspiratorial view of the world. As I've talked about in whole videos, Hubbard created an incredibly complex conspiracy theory that has Scientology at the center of it, being attacked and beleaguered, on all ends by these dark forces that seek to control this planet and the population on it. And that they are actively trying to create a planet of sheep, and mind-numbed, zombie implanted, people who won't question and won't fight back and won't critically think about anything. So Hubbard says Scientologists are the only ones who have an inkling of what the real truth is, And these dark forces are arrayed against Scientology to hold back and suppress the truth. And so when somebody like me goes to the dark side, quote unquote, that means that I've sided with those dark forces. So the OSA staff members have a whole nother level of indoctrination and reinforcement that needs to be busted through before you could get them to even consider that you're talking about something like the truth. So that's the training they get. Now mentally, there's a lot of things going on up in the brain that actually prevent a person from being able to easily critically think or even intake information, such as mine, when they are so heavily indoctrinated against receiving that kind of information. I'm talking about here one mechanism, for example, one of the stronger ones is motivated reasoning, where you, and it's exactly like it sounds. I mean, it's reasoning, but it's motivated. It's motivated by some particular goal. So rather than just looking at a pile of information and being able to intake all of it and then prioritize and sort it out and figure out what's what, you don't even intake certain parts of this information because you're motivated not to, basically, because it somehow attacks your biases or your prejudices, or it somehow you're able to filter it out because it doesn't serve your preconceived ideas or notions. We all do this all the time. No one's immune from this. Just knowing about it is not enough proofing up to be able to easily combat it. It's how our brains work. We want information that confirms what we already think and what we already feel like we know is the truth. So we only receive information that reinforces that, and we actively block information that doesn't. It takes a great deal of effort to overcome that. It takes a conscientious effort to do so. And that's one of the things about critical thinking that makes it so hard to do, and why it's not really super popular either, because it runs smack up against all of our prejudices and the things that emotionally make us feel good or feel right or feel true or feel like it, I'm making a difference in the world, or I'm doing all the good things that I'm supposed to be doing because I do this and I do this and I do this. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are politically. It doesn't matter where you are religiously or morally or ethically. We all think this way. So we all justify and rationalize our actions and our beliefs. And the information that comes into us that challenges those beliefs or those actions or those ideas we have, we're not down with accepting those right away. Like I said, it takes a real effort to be able to do that. So that is also, in the end, all that indoctrination Hubbard does plays on those kind of mechanisms. It gives people in Scientology all kinds of reasons to not believe anybody except L. Ron Hubbard or Scientologists in good standing like David Miscavige, right? It gives them a whole heap of reasons to believe that stuff and to nullify anything that is not that, okay? So that's kind of the simplicity of it. I hope that answers your question. Matt, I got out before Debbie Cook's email and court testimony and did not see what its effect was like in the Scientology community. How big of an impact did she make? I've talked to a few Scientologists who act like she was just some nutjob SP who just somehow rose to be the commanding officer of the world's largest service org and the mecca of technical perfection for decades. I never cease to be amazed by the ability Scientologists have to say someone is the most elite and ethical OT in the galaxy one day, then turn around the moment that person is declared and say they were always a downstat SP and everyone knew that. Never ceases to amaze me either, Matt, but then I look at life out in the real world and outside the bubble world, and I look at the way that people have these kind of cultish kind of ideas and the certainty that they're so right and so true. And anybody who steps outside that side, I mean, this is tribalism defined. If you're in that tribe, no matter what it is, and you step out or you start looking at things a little differently, it's completely and utterly predictable that no matter what the subject matter is, no matter how, how right you are, how wrong they are, how right they are, how wrong you are, like it doesn't, right and wrong doesn't enter into it. If you're stepping outside the circle, then you're the bad guy. And you're gonna and they have to make you the bad guy because otherwise they have to question their own beliefs And I just went over how hard that is to do. So yeah, it is teeth-gnashingly frustrating sometimes. Okay, now as far as your question about Debbie Cook's email goes, let's go ahead and go over this real fast. Debbie Cook left Scientology many years ago, and in New Year's of 2012, the New Year's between 2011 and 2012, she fired out this email that went out to like 5,000 Scientologists in good standing, because she at the time was a Scientologist in good standing. And this was a very long email with lots of Hubbard quotes in it showing how David Miscavige was off the rails. Scientology was completely going over a cliff. They had all this money and weren't doing anything with it, and they were only greedily sucking up more with a high-powered vacuum, and that this was not the Scientology L. Ron Hubbard envisioned. It was a pretty powerful email for anyone who was familiar with who Debbie Cook was, but even if they weren't, all the Hubbard quotes in it gave it a whole lot of credibility and oomph, and it really rocked a lot of Scientologists. This went out all over the United States, I think internationally. I mean, the mailing list was quite large. And it was a nuclear explosion in the world of Scientology. Debbie Cook was declared suppressive within a matter of, like a day or two. They went after her. I was in Twin Cities at the time. I had actually already decided to leave the Sea Org, and then that email, because I had decided like a couple weeks before. Then that email hit the lines, and I was like, wow, I knew who Debbie Cook was, and I knew that she had become a public person, but I didn't know, that she was going to put something out that was going to be so anti-Miscavige. It was not an anti-Scientology email. It was very much pro-Scientology and pro-Hubbard. It was anti-Miscavige in the direction he was taking the church. So when that came out, and I was on this mission in Twin Cities, we had about 3 or 4 people call in amongst the Twin Cities field. And remember that at this time, the Twin Cities field was like 50 people, something like that, 50 or 60 people. I mean, there's not a lot of Scientologists actively doing Scientology in Twin Cities. So this was this was like, what, 10% of them calling in, something like that. 8%, who were like, what's this email? I don't know how many people received it, but that's how many people we found out received it. And they were supposed to be called in and shown this issue that came out from the church. Not an SP declare on Debbie Cook, but just a breakdown of why she was wrong and how this was totally en theta and shouldn't be looked at, and she's now declared, and she's a bad person. So I got curious. That is what drove me to get so curious, is this letter saying she's so horrible and awful. And I was like, well, I know Debbie Cook. I worked with her many years before. She ran Flag for decades, as you said, and now she's the most horrible, evil person ever because she sent an email out. What does this email say? So I actually found it. I pulled it up, and I read it, and I was like, damn, she's got some points. This makes sense. All these Hubbard quotes, she's absolutely spot on right about everything she's saying here. And that only reinforced my desire to leave the Sea Org as quickly as possible, even though I still was a believer in Scientology. Remember, the email was not anti-Scientology, it was anti-Miscavige. So that was probably similarly received, the way I received it, because I was a Sea Org member on mission. I was the most hardcore, dedicated Scientologist, or I was at that level and in that group of hardcore, dedicated Scientology Sea Org members. And I read it and I was like, whoa, she's right, And it was done very, 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 it was worded very well to do that, to create that effect. So I think there were a lot of people who really freaked out. Some people, of course, the real dedicated diehards didn't, get fazed by any of it, as per the reasons I've already gone over today. But there were a lot of people who had left Scientology, who I'm sure got that email, or were on the edges, under the radar. Now, this is speculation on my part, but if, from what I did see and hear and the feedback I've received from former members who have told me about Debbie Cook's email, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people who received it just went, yep. And it just reinforced why they were under the radar, why they weren't going in anymore, why they weren't so interested in Scientology anymore. And it just firmed up their resolve to stay away. So those are the effects I'm aware of on it. Of course, the church took her to court very quickly, tried to persecute her for having sent that email out, and instead got their asses handed to them in a really big way, and ended up having to pay out a ton of money to Debbie Cook to really get her to shut up. But that was, in that context, in that situation, I don't blame Debbie Cook for taking that, because that was a big success for her and for all of us, in terms of that situation there. So there you go. Jim Gattel. Chris, once the auditor removes body thetans to rid you of N theta or give you superpowers, what is to stop other thetans from entering your mind? Or is that the point? Hey, you're now clear. To stay clear, you must spend $1,000 a month on additional auditing. All right, well, OT levels 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 all deal with body thetans. And so there's a lot of money being made by the Church of Scientology over exercising, getting rid of these body thetans that are supposed to be clustered all over your body and are supposed to basically be making up your perception of your body, and it takes years and years and years to clear all these things out. So what's to prevent more from coming back? Well, the idea or the theory behind body thetans, as I understand it, based on what I read, and if anybody out there who has read more about this than me or knows more about this than me wants to pitch in on this in the comments, I'm happy to hear any feedback on this. But from what I understand, the whole existence of these body thetans relies on or is created by a traumatizing incident of such force and power that it really could not be easily conceived of here on Earth. I mean, this whole notion of the Xenu narrative has within it, I mean, if you think about it, if it was true, and it can't be true, but if all the events that Hubbard lays out actually were to happen, you would have a genocide, a galactic genocide of billions upon billions of people being killed. And not just killed, but then raked over the coals, dumped through volcanoes, nuclear explosions, solar wind. I mean, so much stuff going on, so much force exerted on them. Not just their bodies, which are wiped out in a nuclear explosion, but spiritually, they're through this kind of energy that's used against them that somehow is supposed to be able to affect a being, a spiritual entity that has no mass, wavelength, location in space or time. I mean, that's the basic contradiction of all of this, is how do you use energy to affect a spiritual entity that doesn't have matter, energy, space, or time as part of its makeup? It really doesn't make any sense. So, entertaining these questions about this stuff is all fun and games to me because this stuff doesn't make any sense. At the most fundamental level, it's complete nonsense. But going along with what Hubbard said, the thing that creates the body thetans, the thing that makes a regular run-of-the-mill Joe thetan, you're a thetan, I'm a thetan, the thing that would take to knock us out and turn us into these body thetans would be a level of force exerted on us in such a traumatizing way that, we wouldn't live through it here. It would definitely destroy you, your body, and it would traumatize you spiritually to such an extent that you'd just basically be half asleep most of the time. So the thing and that's what makes them, okay? So and then they cluster together because everybody, let's say you had, in this Xenu thing or some other similar incident, where you're flying through space and you end up, flying through a sun or something, and there's, 20 of you in the spaceship, and you go flying through the sun. Well, obviously you all die, but through the force and magnitude of that death and that incident, you are all just, spiritually just knocked for a loop, and you're all kind of clustered together now as these little, disembodied spirits or thetans. and you're out of it, and you're out of it for a real good long time. And by the way, I just kind of came up with flying through the sun. I don't think that's even enough force for what we're talking about, but whatever. I'm just kind of pulling stuff out of my, whatever here. So that kind of incident is necessary to create body thetans. And once you're a body thetan, you're not really flitting around the universe being very causative or OT or very able. You're very disabled spiritually. I mean, you're half dead most of the time. So, so going over and taking over somebody else's body is not really at the top of your to-do list, you see. So that's kind of that situation. However, could some other spiritual entity who is, supercharged or in really good shape come and fight for you over your body? Sure, probably could, but who would want to? I mean, you can just go get another body yourself, and the whole point of the death and life and death and birth and death and birth and death and birth cycle is that you're so, inundated to, you're so used to it. It's such a habit that you just go get another body out of the hospital, get a baby body, and you grow it, and you live that life. And Hubbard talks about how you say a little prayer even when you get the body. I'm going to take care of this body. I'm going to be a good thetan for this body. This is going to be great. We're going to have a great life together. I don't remember the words of it, but it was something along those lines. Of this is going to be a great life, and I'm going to make it a wonderful one, sort of thing. So you're kind of committed to this whole idea of having your own body. So you could theoretically go attack somebody else's body who's already occupied, but they're familiar with that body. They've laid themselves over that body. They control that body. They got all their little mechanisms in place to control the body. So you're going to have to go in there and you're going to have to overcome all of that and kick them out of there. And I don't know how thetans fight specifically, or at least there's no way for me to easily describe it. I know some things, but it's neither here nor there. You'd have to be in really good shape to kick somebody else out of their body and take over and keep them away, because then they'd come right back at you, of course, right? So if you're in that good a shape, of course, you could just go get your own body and kind of run it that way. So that's the first thing that sort of occurs to me on that is like, why would somebody go through all that trouble anyway? So it's not something you really have to be super freaked out about or super scared of as a Scientologist. And that's not the thing that keeps people going, on through the OT levels and stuff, is fear of being taken over by another thetan or something. That's not really on anybody's mind on it. So it's a good question, but I think that's about the best way I could address it. Stephen Willis, can the almighty dollar overturn any of the rules of Scientology? I ask because it certainly seems like it can. I've heard all sorts of stories where, under David Miscavige at least, the church seems to outright ignore its own policy because it will financially benefit. Once, they apparently let a guy into the Sea Org despite knowing he'd used considerable amounts of LSD in his youth because he was well-moneyed. Tori Chrisman tells a story about her ex-husband winning $50,000 in the Scientology arbitration against his employer. As if by magic, the next day, when they tried to claim the money, the arbitration policy had been canceled from on high overnight. His employer just happened to be a major donor at Flag. Then there's the Reed-Slatkin Ponzi scheme, where he duped people out of hundreds of millions of dollars combined. He gave millions to Scientology, and after the whole scheme fell apart, the church was called upon to return at least part of the stolen money he'd given them into a victims fund as an act of goodwill. To my knowledge, they'd never contributed even a single dollar to the victims. Is any money off limits to the church? No, man, it's not. And this comes back to, Hubbard wrote a lot of policies, but the unwritten policy that guides all of it is make money. Now, there is a policy that says make money, when in doubt, make money, when in doubt, make more money, and then if you have any more doubts, make some more money. I mean, that's about the clearest expression of intent Hubbard ever committed to writing. He obfuscated it with all kinds of policies about servicing the public and how to run treasury and how to do this and how to do that. But the senior policy of Scientology is get money in the door in volume. And then do more of that every week, week after week after week. They're never satisfied. They're never sated. Too much is never enough. So, when that whole attitude permeates an entire organization, and in this case, it does, Scientology, at all levels, then it's pretty clear what the purpose of the activity actually is, which is why I keep going back to Scientology as a money-making scam, which uses religious cloaking to hide its true intent. All the religious stuff is just smoke and mirrors. So when you look at it, when you step outside of all of Hubbard's, smoke and mirrors, and you look at what they're actually doing and how they actually operate, the examples you gave are, just par for the course. Those are perfect examples, and there are thousands of them, because Scientology operates always towards making money. Now, is there somebody's money they won't take? Yes, there are some people who are too conny or too obviously rip-off artists for even Scientology. There was a guy, Kevin Trudeau, who falls into this category. He's a guy who just scams people out of money. I mean, he's done memory recall techniques. He's done, you see this guy doing infomercials a lot, or you used to see this guy doing infomercials a lot on memory, on speed reading, on Dianetics, on vitamins, on, this, that, and the other thing. He came in and was interested in promoting Dianetics and using it and doing something with it. And they said, yeah, great, come on in. And then they took his money, and then somebody went, wait a minute, this guy is even too scammy for us. And they gave him his money back, and they kicked him out because they thought he was a criminal. And I can't say one way or the other whether he is or not. He certainly has a lot of schemes that he tries to pull in order to get people to give him money. But is he a criminal? I don't know. I'm not going to say that. But Scientology did say that, and they kicked him out, right? So I guess that money had a little bit too much risk connected with it, and they didn't want to have anything to do with that. Those are the only times I've seen where Scientology has kicked money out of the church. Most of the time, they're trying to suck it up with a grand, big Empire State Building size Hoover vacuum. Okay, there you go. Joseph Schlau. On one of James Randi's presentations I viewed on YouTube, he made mention that the Boy Scouts of America had presented L. Ron Hubbard with a Lifetime Achievement Award, he being an Eagle Scout. I looked it up and found it was posthumously presented in the late 1990s. Even the Scientology website listed it, but did not give the exact date. With all the scandals and abuse that had already come out by this time, I find it amazing that the BSA could have considered him one of their praiseworthy Eagles. Any thoughts on this? Yeah, sure. This is actually a really good example of when organizations out in the big wide world don't do their due diligence. And that happens all the time, way more often than you would ever expect it to. I mean, we've got schools right now in California and Chicago who have opened their doors wide open to transcendental meditation, which is the most religious practice you can possibly imagine. It literally starts with a prayer. But they're teaching this to school kids in low-income schools because that's where they want to get inroads into the schools so that they can teach transcendental meditation at all levels. It is a cult, and it has infiltrated schools in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Chicago. How did they get away with that? Because they tried to do that exact same thing in the 1970s, got taken to court, they got kicked out. It's case law, it's record, it's on, anybody can look that up. But you know who wouldn't look it up? The people who run the schools in Chicago and San Francisco and Los Angeles, where they've let these guys back in. So to expect these guys to be, to be doing their due diligence is good. They should be doing their due diligence, but you know what? They don't. So you get nonsense like the Boy Scouts of America awarding L. Ron Hubbard. Now, in the 1990s, there wasn't a whole lot of internet to do a whole lot of research on this. And I'm pretty sure the guys who were running the Boy Scouts in the 1990s had other things on their mind than, fact-checking L. Ron Hubbard. The church probably came in there with a whole bunch of packs of information and how wonderful L. Ron Hubbard was, how he was the youngest Eagle Scout to ever become an Eagle back in the day. Not true. And how, he was a member of the Explorers Club, which is true, and how he went on to do all these great feats of discovery, not true. And he fought in the war and he suffered these wounds, and not true, and blah, 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 blah. All this crap that they piled on to the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts looked at this and went, well, this looks like due diligence to me. Sounds good. Let's give him an award, and they just rubber stamped it. So that's kind of how that sort of thing goes on in the big wide world. And it goes on all the time. And it's because people they just lack critical thinking. And they just don't question things when they should. And so you get nonsense like that. Kirsten Sundell. Chris, thank you for your channel and blog. Although I enjoy all of your videos, that series with Sunny Pereira on Scientology, mental health, and the introspection rundown may be the best work you've done yet. The hair stood up on the back of my neck when Sunny read Hubbard's definition of psychosis, and the two of you described what happens on the introspection rundown. Surely this is thought reform at its most dangerous. My question is this. Given Hubbard's definition of a psychotic/insane individual as a person who is screwing up at work, chronically ill, demanding a transfer, or wanting out, how often are Scientology staff or Sea Org members who are disaffected, exhausted, sick, or just want to leave subjected to the mental and physical torture of the introspection rundown as opposed to being put on the RPF? At what point is a Sea Org member branded as insane versus just bad? Chuck Beatty's story in the comments made me wonder if this is a common occurrence for Sea Org members who reach a breaking point and want out. Would a lovely person like Kay Rowe be branded as insane for the crime of having chronic untreated health problems? Okay, so Scientology is an extreme destructive cult that engages in some pretty destructive behavior, sexual assault, covering up pedophilia. The laundry list of things is quite long, and so it's very easy for me to understand that we could take this to the worst possible interpretation at all possible times, and that doesn't really work out in the real world. For example, you asked about Kay Rowe. Well, there was plenty of opportunity in the years that Kay Rowe was suffering from medical problems. And by the way, if anybody doesn't know who she is, she's a former Sea Org member who I did an extensive interview with on my channel, which you can check out. All that time, over all those years that she was suffering from, fatigue and chronic fatigue and problems with all sorts of body problems, they did not consider her insane, and they did not put her on an introspection rundown. And they very definitely could have done that if that's the usual treatment for somebody who is having chronic medical problems and wants to leave. That's not the case. Very, very, very few people have been given an introspection rundown over the years. I'm talking about a small number of people, like I'd say in the tens. I wouldn't say in the hundreds. Certainly wouldn't say in the thousands. It's not used that often. What's used much more often are security checking, pain, punishment drive type activities, sending a person to the galley. When Kay and I talked about the sort of things she had to endure, one, just having to be on post and do her regular job became torturous all by itself because she wasn't allowed to get some time off in the day, go take a break, with her feet and her other parts of her body that were blowing up. She just wasn't allowed any kind of decent schedule. So that alone becomes its own form of punishment. You don't have to pile on an introspection rundown on top of that, or an RPF. People aren't sent to the RPF just because they want to leave Scientology or leave the Sea Org. That wouldn't work out so good because you have to sign paperwork that says you're willing to be on the RPF and you're volunteering to be there. And and if somebody wants to leave the Sea Org, that's not where they're going to put them. They're going to do other things with them, right? If they want to punish somebody for having done something that the Scientology thinks is, morally reprehensible or treasonous to the Sea Org, that's when the RPF assignments start happening. And as we've gone over in my video on Thursday, they're not even doing that anymore. So, we'll see. One thing I didn't particularly mention in that video on Thursday that I should have is they never canceled the RPF, so they could always bring it back. There's nothing stopping them from starting RPF assignments today if they want to. But generally, again, like I said, they wouldn't normally be assigning people to the RPF who want to leave or who have medical problems. People with medical problems don't do well on the RPF. So that wouldn't generally be the course of handling, right? The security checks, the heavy, the labor, doing physical labor during the day. As I explained on Thursday, there's the Cat B EPF, the Category B EPF, where they're sending people for fix-up and stuff. They'll do that kind of stuff. Now, as far as the broader context of your question, though, I wanted to make this point. Hubbard didn't define a psychotic as somebody who wants to leave and is transferring and all that. He didn't do that by accident. That was on purpose. He purposefully took all the behavior of people. This is just my opinion, of course. I didn't talk to Hubbard about this, but seems pretty clear to me that he looked at all the behavior he didn't like that was going on in the Sea Org around him, because when he wrote this stuff, he was on his boats and doing his little faux Navy Sea Org deal. And he went, these people are thorns in my side. These are people who give me trouble. These are the people who aren't getting their job done. So you know what? We're going to call them psychotic, because that's what they are. Because Hubbard was so fanatical and so into his vision of, world peace and understanding and through Scientology that he thought that the best way to go about accomplishing that was punishment drive. And so anybody who was against him or against his effort, his Sea organization, his little mini army, was clearly nuts. Because look, that we're doing yeoman's work here. We're doing the sane work. We're doing the stuff that matters. The Sea Org is the only group on the planet that is actually changing conditions for the better. So if you're not with us, you're obviously crazy. So he had no moral qualms with calling anybody who didn't want to be there or was sloughing off or who, was otherwise creating trouble. Yeah, they're psychotic, and off they go. So that was kind of what I think was behind that policy or writing those issues about psychosis, and behind what ended up being this introspection rundown, which basically just tortured people who'd had enough, and made them even more docile and more compliant rather than more sane. That's really the end result of the introspection rundown. So I don't know. Those are just some thoughts off the top of my head about all that. Okay, everybody, that is our show for this week. No flash answers because I need you guys to send me some more. I got lots and lots of questions that have been asked of me that are long form, good, solid questions, but I need more flash answer questions because I always like to throw at least 3 in per episode. So talk to you guys later. Thanks for coming around. Leave any questions, comments, or feedback in the comments section here on YouTube. See you next week. Bye-bye.